What if I told you that the prayer you whisper in the darkest valley might contain a hidden fire capable of splitting the very shadows that surround you? What if I told you that praise, the act most people reserve for moments of comfort, was actually forged by God to be a weapon for the impossible? A weapon meant for the hours when your voice trembles and your strength fades. I, Dante, who once walked through the circles of despair and saw the souls trapped in their own silence, now speak to you as one who has watched heavenly light erupt in the bleakest chambers of the human heart. And I must ask, have you ever wondered why praise rises strongest from those who suffer the most? Have you noticed how the wounded sing with a tremor that shakes unseen realms? Perhaps you have prayed countless times for deliverance, yet never stopped to ask why God calls you to praise, even when your world collapses beneath your feet. Praise is not decoration, it is not the soft hymn of an easy life, it is a battle plan. A declaration drawn from heaven itself. A blueprint for victory in the very places where defeat surrounds you, and the breath of the enemy chills your bones. And as I lift my thoughts through the memory of ancient scripture, I am reminded of something far greater than ritual. For this prayer of praise is a weapon, a declaration, a direct alignment with heaven itself. And when the Spirit of God awakens praise within a suffering soul, something shifts in the realm the eyes cannot see, for the enemy expects your tears, but he fears your praise. He expects your silence, but he trembles when your trembling voice rises like a flame toward the throne. So let me draw you into this mystery, the way I once was drawn into the hidden chambers of truth when I journeyed through the shadows. Praise in times of difficulty does not deny pain. It refuses to bow to it. Praise does not erase suffering. It places suffering beneath the feet of the one whose glory no storm can extinguish. And here in this first breath of our journey, you must understand what so many overlook. Praise is not the sound you make when life is easy. It is the sound heaven recognizes as warfare when life becomes impossible. When you lift praise in the night itself begins to break, for Scripture whispers this secret again and again. In the Psalms I once recited, walking beneath silent stars, I heard the cry, "Yet will I praise him," uttered by souls who stood between despair and hope and chose to release a sound that shattered the grip of darkness. And have you ever considered that praise is the only command God gives that requires no resources, no wealth, no perfect conditions? Praise is the surrender of the heart, the offering that turns your weakness into a throne room where God himself descends. But here lies the question that must pierce your spirit. If praise carries this power, why do so many wait until the battle is over to release it? Why do so many stand silent as if praise were reserved for victory instead of being the very force that births it? I ask you not as a poet, but as a witness of light. Will you dare to praise in your difficulty? Will you dare to praise when the night tightens around your spirit? Will you dare to praise when you stand before what seems impossible? For this is spiritual warfare, and praise is the sword placed in your hand. And once you understand this truth, you will never pray the same way again. For praise is not just sound, it is surrender. Not just surrender, it is warfare. Not just warfare, it is the breath of heaven poured into the lungs of a weary soldier. And in this first part of our journey, I call you to lift your heart to the one who reigns above every storm. For when you praise in the impossible, you invite the dawn to rise before the sun appears. As I descended through the chambers of my own memories, I began to understand the truth that even the wise often overlook, a truth that hides not in the ease of daylight, but in the trembling hours when the soul bends under impossible weight. For in those moments, praise becomes something the world cannot explain and hell cannot endure. And I speak this to you as one who has watched both despair and glory pass before me, like twin shadows wrestling for the heart of man. Praise, in difficult cases, is not born from comfort, it is born from revelation. And a revelation that the darkness pressing against you is not the end of your story, but the battlefield on which heaven intends to reveal its strength. And here lies the secret, that few dare to uncover. Praise is not the music of joy. It is the weapon of endurance. It is not the celebration of victory, but the declaration that victory belongs to God even before your eyes see it unfold. The enemy can resist your logic, he can resist your discipline, he can resist your self-imposed courage, but he cannot resist praise, for praise shifts the balance of realms. Praise calls upon the authority of the one who reigns beyond the reach of any earthly chain. And when a suffering believer releases praise, it is as if a crack opens in the iron walls surrounding them, and the light of heaven pours in unstoppable, unyielding, undeniable. I have seen souls imprisoned in hopelessness lift praise from the shivering corners of their hearts, and instantly the air around them trembled as though an unseen army had marched into their despair. For the realm of darkness has always feared this one thing, the sound of a wounded believer exalting the Almighty. The enemy understands that a believer who praises in pain is a believer he cannot break. He knows that praise given in the valley is the sound that summons the host of heaven and weakens every chain he forged in secrecy. And this is why he works tirelessly to silence you in your darkest hours. He wants your voice buried beneath fear. He wants your spirit suffocated beneath confusion. He wants your praise swallowed by the pressure of your circumstances. But if he can stop your praise, he can stop your breakthrough. And if he cannot stop your praise, he cannot stop the victory God has written for you. For praise is not merely the lifting of words, it is the raising of a banner in enemy territory, a banner that declares this ground belongs to God even before the miracle arrives. And you must grasp this mystery with the seriousness of a warrior preparing for conflict. Praise is not suggestion, it is strategy. It is not poetry, it is power. And in the great architecture of divine warfare, God designed praise as the gateway through which his presence invades human impossibility. Remember the ancient singers who walked before Israel into battle. Their voices rising before swords were drawn. God placed praise at the front because praise always disorients the adversary. So it confuses his assaults. It cracks the foundation of the fear he builds around your mind. And I have listened in the depths where souls trembled beneath sorrow, and yet even there I heard faint whispers of praise rising like sparks, and I watched how those sparks did not die. They became torches, and the torches became flames that consumed the grip of despair. So you must understand this praise is not for moments when life feels manageable. Praise is for the hours when the weight of reality seeks to crush the breath out of your chest. Praise is a declaration that what surrounds you cannot overpower the one who surrounds it. Praise is surrender, yes, but surrender is not weakness, it is alignment. The alignment of the human heart with the eternal will of God, where no chain, no curse, no affliction can stand unchallenged. And when you praise in difficulty, you are not ignoring your suffering, you are refusing to allow suffering to write the final chapter of your story. You are declaring that God is still God, even in the storm, even in the silence, even in the chaos. And when heaven hears that declaration, it responds with force, not gentle sentiment, but force. The force that splits seas, levels walls, breaks prison doors and shakes foundations that were meant to hold you captive. Praise, in difficult cases, is heaven's invitation to intervene. It is the signal flare that tells the angels the battle has begun and the soldier has chosen faith over fear. I tell you this not as a theory, but as a witness of realms that the eyes of flesh cannot behold. Because as I journeyed through infernal shadows, I noticed this strange and radiant truth. No chain forged by darkness can withstand the rising sound of praise. And now I invite you to consider the question that echoes through eternity. If the enemy fears your praise more than your strength, why do you withhold it? If heaven moves when your voice rises, why do you silence yourself? Praise is your weapon, your declaration, your blueprint for survival and triumph in the impossible. So lift it, let it rise. Even if your voice quivers, even if your heart aches, even if your future seems sealed by circumstance, praise. Anyway, for praise is the sound that unlocks what was once deemed unreachable, and opens doors that the world swore would remain forever closed. As I crossed through the trembling borders between despair and revelation, I discovered that praise is not a song, nor a ritual, nor a fleeting moment of emotion. It is a force older than sorrow itself, a force breathed into humanity before the first tear ever fell upon the earth. And as I speak to you now, I speak as one who has walked through chambers of shadow and chambers of glory and found that praise alone belongs to both realms. For praise functions not as sound, but as alignment. Not as melody, but as authority. And if there is one word capable of shifting the direction of your entire existence, it is this word, praise. For praise means to enthrone God in the very place where fear seeks to rule. Praise is the act by which the soul declares who holds dominion even when darkness surrounds it on every side. And this is why praise cannot be reduced to music, for music may soothe, but praise commands. Music may comfort, but praise conquers. And as I journeyed deeper into the architecture of divine mysteries, I understood that praise carries a resonance that no chain can resist. For praise does not arise from the lips alone, it rises from the core, the very center of the human being, where God's breath first awakened life. Praise is the returning of that breath back to its source. And when that breath is offered, heaven answers with movement. And I realized then that praise is not the reward of the joyful, but the refuge of the broken, the stronghold of the weary, the shelter of the trembling heart. Praise is the firm rock beneath the feet of the one who has no strength left to stand by themselves and yet dares to lift their spirit toward the sky. And this mystery became clear to me. Praise is not merely declaring God's greatness. It is declaring where you stand in relation to that greatness. Praise places you under his covering beyond the reach of the shadows that threaten to swallow you. It lifts you out of the narrow valley of your own understanding and seats you upon higher ground where despair cannot dictate your destiny. And you must let this truth pierce. You praise is not admiration, it is allegiance. The allegiance of a soul that refuses to surrender to the realm of fear. A soul that rises even when its knees shake. And this is the reason praise possesses such indescribable strength, because it draws its power from a truth hell cannot touch, that God reigns even here, even now, even in the place where your strength has collapsed. And as I stood before that truth, I understood why praise unsettles the adversary. Praise shifts ownership. It tears the crown from the hands of fear and places it back upon the head of the Almighty. Praise does not deny the storm, it dethrones it. For the storm loses its authority when you lift praise in its midst. And this is why the ancient texts describe praise as a garment. Praise wraps the soul in light, even when surrounded by darkness. And light is not frightened of darkness, for light existed before darkness ever uttered its first threat. Understand, this praise is the remembrance of God's nature, the proclamation that his character is unchanging, even when your circumstances collapse. And when a believer remembers who God is, heaven begins to move in ways unseen. For the Almighty has never been drawn to the strength of the human heart, but to its surrender, its willingness to acknowledge his dominion in every season. And praise is that acknowledgement, the shout of a heart that refuses to let the enemy write the narrative. The cry of one who says, though the earth trembles beneath me, I will anchor myself in the one who does not tremble. And in that anchoring, an invisible battle begins to shift for praise tears. The veil that fear pulls across your vision and allows you to see not what is collapsing around you, but who stands above the collapse. And as I walked through the darkest circles of human anguish, I saw this truth again. Praise does not rise from easy days. Praise rises from nights when the soul feels cornered and yet still chooses alignment with heaven. Praise is the sound that declares, I belong to the kingdom that cannot be shaken. And every time those words rise, heaven echoes them with thunder. For praise is not a request, it is a royal decree. A decree that claims territory in your heart and territory in your circumstance. And once you grasp this, praise will no longer be something you do, it will become something you are. You will become a living declaration of God's reign, a vessel of unwavering alignment. And the darkness that once intimidated you will shrink under the realization that you have taken your position under divine authority. For praise is not the echo of victory, it is the birthplace of it. And those who understand this walk through impossible cases with a strength that defies reason, a strength drawn not from themselves but from the throne. They exalt. As I wandered through the shifting corridors of memory, I beheld a scene that returns to me like a soft lantern in the cavern of my thoughts. A woman standing alone beside a window in the final watch of the night, her hands trembling against the cold glass, while the world around her felt as though it had conspired to collapse upon her spirit. Her child lay ill, her husband distant, her strength evaporated like mist under a foreign sun. And yet in that desolate hour she did something the realm of darkness never anticipates. She whispered a song, not a triumphant anthem, but a fragile thread of praise. A sound so faint, one might think it would break in the air. But I watched something extraordinary unfold. The moment her voice rose, her despair shifted. The room did not change. The sickness did not vanish. The loneliness did not flee. But something deeper awakened. The atmosphere bent as though acknowledging the arrival of a higher presence. For praise released in weakness possesses a resonance unknown to human logic. It stretches beyond circumstance and becomes a signal to the heavens, a cry, not of defeat, but of allegiance, as though the soul were lighting a torch to declare, I still trust. And I have carried that image with me through the realms I have walked, because it teaches a truth most overlook. Praise is not born from the stage, it is born from the furnace. It is not shaped on the mountain, but in the valley, where breath is short and hope is thin. And as I moved through the halls of human sorrow, I saw another image, a father sitting beside a silent hospital bed, his head bowed, not in despair, but in a quiet, steadfast reverence. He lifted praise in the form of gratitude, for the strength he did not feel, for the peace he could not touch. And again the unseen realm shifted around him, as though the echo of his praise summoned reinforcements from a kingdom untouched by fear. And these moments reveal the mystery that praise rises strongest, not when life is gentle, but when the soul stands on fractured ground. For praise in difficulty does not flow from abundance, it flows from decision. The decision to believe that the one who breathed stars into existence still walks among the broken, still rests his hand upon trembling shoulders, still hears the quiet songs of those who stand at the edge of surrender. And as I continued my journey, I saw yet another soul, a man crushed beneath the weight of failure, sitting alone in the remnants of his ruined dreams. He stared at the shattered pieces of the life he thought he would live. And yet from the dust around him, he lifted a whisper of adoration. And I realized then that praise in devastation is like a seed planted in stone, impossible to the eye, yet undeniable to the realm of heaven. For praise cracks the hardness of despair from the inside out. It sends roots through the rubble and draws water from unseen springs. And those who dare to offer praise in such moments are like warriors standing barefoot on broken ground, lifting their banner toward the sky, even while arrows fall around them. And I must tell you that praise in the ordinary spaces of suffering carries a fragrance the angels recognize. For I have heard them stir when such praise is released. I have felt the weight of divine attention turn toward the one whose voice rises not from triumph, but from trust. And perhaps you know these scenes for yourself. Perhaps you have stood in a kitchen where silence pressed so heavily upon you that even breathing felt like an act of courage. And yet you spoke words of reverence into the stillness. Perhaps you have driven down an empty road, your heart heavy with burdens you could not name, and yet you whispered a hymn that did not match the emotions within you. That whisper was not weakness, it was warfare. For praise in the mundane sorrow, drenched moments of life, is the place where real battles are fought. Not on stages, not in crowds, but in the quiet corners where no one sees you standing except God himself. And in these simple but profound moments, praise becomes the bridge, the place where the human and the divine meet, the place where weariness touches glory and finds strength. And as I saw these glimpses unfold, across the tapestry of lives, I understood that praise is not an escape from reality. It is a proclamation within reality, a proclamation that the valley is not sovereign, that the darkness has not claimed dominion, that the impossible is not the final authority. Praise in everyday suffering is the cry of a heart insisting that God remains enthroned even when everything below trembles. And this truth will follow you into every closed room and every sleepless night. Praise does not erase difficulty, but it rewrites your place within it. And when you stand in the midst of a circumstance that refuses to yield and lift praise anyway, you become the very picture of courage in the eyes of heaven. For praise in ordinary pain is the hidden battlefield where victories begin long before they appear on the earth. As I continued my passage through these layered realms of human struggle and divine mystery, a question rose before me like a towering gate, a question that no soul can avoid if they desire to walk in the strength that praise awakens. For as I looked upon the many who lift their voices in times of comfort and fall silent in times of turmoil, I felt the weight of this truth pressing upon my spirit, and so I now lay it gently yet firmly upon yours. When the storm closes around you, do you release praise or do you retreat into the shadows of fear? When the night grows heavy and the path before you disappears beneath uncertainty, do you lift your gaze toward the heavens or do you bow beneath the pressure? Praise in difficult cases demands an honesty that few dare to embrace, for praise reveals not what your lips say, but what your heart believes. And so I ask you, with the gravity of one who has watched souls rise and souls fall, what does your heart cling to when the world fractures? Do you cling to complaint as though it were a shield, or do you cling to praise as though it were a sword? Complaint may feel natural, but it imprisons the soul. Praise may feel impossible, but it releases the captives. And I must ask again, when your strength fades, do you run toward God or do you shrink away, believing the lie that He is distant? How many speak of faith, but only those who praise in difficulty walk in it? The many say they trust, but only those whose lips release honor while tears fall truly know trust. Praise is not merely the act of declaring God's greatness. It is the measure of your confidence that He remains sovereign, even when your life crumbles at your feet. And this measure confronts every soul with a profound question: whom do you believe more, the storm or the one who commands the storm? Whom do you follow? More the fear in your chest or the whisper of the Spirit calling you forward? And as I observed the hearts of many who walk the earth, I noticed a pattern. Those who collapse inward during hardship have built their foundation upon shifting sand. But those who rise in praise, even when the world collapses around them, have anchored themselves in a kingdom that cannot be moved. And so I ask you, when affliction knocks upon your door, what rises within you first? Is it dread or is it devotion? Is your first response to rehearse your pain or to release your faith? For you must know this: praise and anxiety cannot govern the same throne. Either your fear will reign or your praise will reign. And the one you choose forms the atmosphere around your spirit. And here lies another question that pierces deeper still. When you lift praise in adversity, is it born from true allegiance or simply from habit? Routine cannot sustain you. In the hour of testing, only revelation can. Habit collapses under pressure, but revelation stands even when the earth shakes. And praise built upon revelation becomes immovable. It becomes the anthem of a warrior who has understood that God is not merely present in triumph, but present in tribulation. And as I walked through the quiet corners of unseen realms, I witnessed countless souls standing at a crossroads, one path carved by fear, the other carved by praise, and most chose the easier path, the one paved with resignation, because it feels familiar, it feels safe. But praise is the narrow road, the road that requires courage, the road that requires surrender of control, the road that declares, I will bless the Lord, not because my situation is good, but because He is good. And so I ask you today, in the depths of your own heart, what road have you chosen? When your hope is pressed, do you grumble or do you glorify? And understand this: your answer to these questions determines the type of battles you will win or lose. For a heart that refuses to praise in hardship has already surrendered the ground to the enemy. But a heart that lifts praise in the darkness is a heart that tears territory from his grip. You may not feel strong, but praise does not require strength. It requires willingness. You may not feel courageous, but courage is not the absence of trembling. It is the decision to stand firm despite trembling. And praise transforms that trembling into a declaration that hell cannot silence. So let the question settle into your spirit like a weight meant to shape you. Do you praise only when the sun warms your face, or do you praise when the wind howls and the earth shakes beneath your feet? For only the latter carries the power that breaks chains and summons deliverance. And once you face this truth, without hiding, without excuses, you will discover that praise was never meant to be occasional. It was meant to be your weapon, your refuge, your proclamation, the sound by which you declare to every invisible force that your hope is anchored in the eternal. And now I ask you once more, with the solemnity of a witness who has walked through heaven and hell, what rises from your spirit when life becomes impossible? For your answer is the doorway to victory or the doorway to defeat. Choose wisely and choose with praise. There came a moment in my wandering through the realms of sorrow when I realized that praise is not merely a theory whispered by trembling hearts, but a reality proven again and again across the sacred timeline of Scripture. And as I turned my gaze through the corridors of divine history, I saw scenes where praise rose not from triumph, but from torment, and yet it shattered the very foundations of impossibility. And the first of these scenes unfolded before me like a trembling flame in the abyss, the prison cell of Paul and Silas. For the Scripture records that at midnight, when the wounds on their backs still bled and the chains on their wrists bit into their flesh, they chose to lift praise. Not a quiet murmur, but a bold anthem rising through the stone corridors, as though they were standing not in a dungeon, but in a sanctuary. And as their voices ascended, something in the realm cracked the earth, shuddered the prison doors, flew open, and every chain fell powerless to the floor. This was no coincidence. It was revelation that praise in the darkest hour unlocks what human hands cannot touch. And I saw that scene as though I stood with them, the stones trembling, the air shifting, the darkness recoiling from the sound of their devotion. For their praise did not wait for deliverance. Their praise summoned it, and then my spirit was carried to another ancient moment, to the mighty walls of Jericho, towering with arrogance before the people of God. Walls carved by human pride and fortified by generations. Yet God commanded not swords first, but praise. The shout of a believing people whose voices became the very force that cracked centuries of resistance. And I beheld the walls collapse, not because of strategy, not because of strength, but because of worship. For praise carries a vibration that no earthly structure can withstand. And as I reflected on this mystery, I understood the pattern. Praise precedes breakthrough, praise precedes deliverance, praise precedes the unraveling of what once seemed immovable. And then I was drawn deeper still to the furnace, where 3 faithful men stood surrounded by flames meant to consume them. Yet instead of being reduced to ash, they walked in the fire with a 4th figure, a radiant presence whose glory eclipsed the fury of the flames. Their refusal to bow to fear and their reverence for the Almighty became the song that invited the divine into the inferno. Praise did not rescue them from the fire. Praise brought God into the fire with them. And this truth echoed through my spirit with immeasurable weight. Praise does not always remove the trial, but it transforms the trial into a place where God reveals his power. And I saw another scene, Elijah standing on Mount Carmel, surrounded by prophets whose voices filled the air with lies. Yet when Elijah lifted words that honored the Lord, fire fell from heaven, consuming the altar, the stones, the water, the dust. Praise became the invitation for divine fire to descend and silence every voice of deception. And so I now say to you with the certainty of one who has seen these stories unfold across the canvas of eternity, praise is the catalyst that draws the hand of God into the realm of man. Praise is not powerless sentiment, it is a spiritual force that exposes the emptiness of fear. And as I walk further into these ancient echoes, I remembered the psalmist lifting praises while surrounded by enemies, declaring, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" For praise in Scripture is always tied to victory, never to defeat, always to movement, never to stagnation, always to divine intervention, never to human limitation. And in every story I saw the same pattern arise like a constant rhythm. Heaven responds to praise. And I must ask you, with the weight of these revelations pressing upon your heart, if the saints of old conquered prisons, walls, flames, armies and despair through praise, what battle in your life remains unconquerable when your praise rises? What chain can withstand the vibration of worship? What darkness can hold its ground when you exalt the one who reigns above it? And I tell you this, as one who has watched these truths unfold across realms visible and invisible. Praise is the bridge between your impossibility and God's intervention, the sacred act that transforms the battlefield from a place of fear into a stage for divine victory. And when you lift praise in difficult cases, you are not merely echoing ancient stories. You are stepping into the same power that turned dungeons into open gates, walls into rubble flames, into sanctuaries, and barren altars into fountains of fire. So let your heart grasp this. Truth praise is more than something they did. It is something you must do. For the God who answered them with earthquakes, with fire, with presence remains the same. God who waits to answer you. And your praise may be the very spark that sets your miracle into motion. As I lifted my eyes from the ancient echoes of Scripture and turned them toward the age in which you now live, I felt a tremor through my spirit, for the world before you is wrapped not in the chains of iron as in the days of old, but in chains woven from noise, hurry, anxiety, and unseen war. And as I beheld the cities crowded with restless hearts, the screens filled with ceaseless voices, the minds drowning beneath the weight of fear and prediction and unrest, I realized that the greatest famine of this era is not bread or water, but the absence of praise. For the modern world has perfected complaint and exalted despair and crowned fear as though it were a ruler worthy of allegiance. And everywhere I walked through the corridors of your time, I saw souls bending beneath invisible burdens, burdens crafted by comparison, by uncertainty, by isolation, by wounds that never find rest because silence has been devoured by noise. Yet in this age, saturated with chaos, praise has become more essential than ever, because praise is the language of clarity in a generation drowning in confusion. And as I observed these scenes, a question burned within me. How can the heart rise when everything around it drags it downward? How can faith breathe when the air itself feels thick with worry? The answer stands unchanged. Praise is the force that cuts through the fog of distraction and reclaims the mind from the siege of fear. For praise lifts the soul above the noise and sets its feet on ground untouched by the turmoil of society. And I watch the way your world moves endlessly forward, without pause, without reflection, without stillness, chasing after achievements and shadows and expectations that crumble in the hand the moment they are grasped. Yet the soul was not made to live in this constant frenzy. The soul was created to rest in the presence of the one who formed it. And praise is the doorway that returns it to that rest. Praise becomes the shelter when the storms of culture rage. Praise becomes the anchor when the tides of opinion shift. Praise becomes the fire that purifies the mind from the poison of fear. And as I stood among the weary multitudes who walk your streets, I noticed something profound. The enemy no longer needs prisons of stone. He builds prisons of thought. He binds not the hands but the imagination. He darkens not the sky but the inner world of the heart until hope dissolves and strength withers. Yet even in this age, praise remains the weapon he cannot neutralize. For praise pierces through invisible walls. Praise shifts atmospheres within the spirit. Praise breaks the narrative of despair that society repeats until it becomes truth. And I saw how many live each day carrying burdens never meant to be theirs, trying to uphold an identity shaped by pressure rather than by God. The world teaches them to glorify achievements, yet hides the necessity of worship. It teaches them to magnify problems, but never to magnify the Lord. And this is why the modern soul collapses under weight. It was not built to carry because it has forgotten the posture from which it gains strength. Yet, when praise returns, strength returns, clarity returns, courage returns, for praise reorders the inner world, placing God at the center and forcing every fear to bow. And as I moved through the unseen layers of this age, I noticed the growing shadows of division, bitterness, rage, and despair gripping hearts across nations and across families and across generations. But praise is the antidote to division, because praise aligns the soul with heaven, not with hostility. Praise uproots bitterness, because praise cannot coexist with resentment. Praise breaks the cycle of despair, because praise declares hope even when hope seems unreasonable. And I tell you this with the gravity of one who has seen the rise and fall of civilizations. Praise is the remedy this age has forgotten. For even now, voices of fear grow louder, voices of deception multiply, voices of anxiety shape decisions. Yet one voice rising in praise carries more weight in the realm of the Spirit than 1,000 voices crying out in fear. And this is why your praise matters right now, not simply for your own soul, but for the atmosphere around you, your home, your family, your community. Praise plants a banner of light in a world overwhelmed by shadow. Praise becomes a declaration that though the world shakes, the heart anchored in God will not. And as I watched the way people chase comfort yet never find peace, pursue pleasure yet never taste joy, I saw the truth. Praise alone fills what the world drains. Praise alone restores what culture consumes. And though the world may dismiss praise as outdated or unnecessary, heaven does not. Heaven still moves at the sound of it. And so I ask you, as one who has walked through the storms of many ages, will you allow the noise of this world to form your spirit, or will you let praise lift you above it? For the times in which you live will continue to shake, but the soul anchored in praise will remain unshaken. And in this age of unending noise, praise is the stillness that reclaims the heart for God. There was a moment in my wandering between realms when I sensed the very air vibrating with tension, as though two unseen armies stood in silent formation, awaiting a single command. And in that suspended stillness, I understood with piercing clarity that praise is not simply the uplifted voice of a believer, but the signal that ignites war in the invisible domain. For the realm of darkness does not tremble at human strength, nor at human intellect, nor at human emotion, but it recoils violently at praise, because praise announces the arrival of divine authority. And as I stepped deeper into that trembling space, I saw how every whispered hallelujah carried the weight of a sword, how every declaration of God's goodness cut through the thick fog of spiritual resistance, as though tearing open a path for the armies of heaven to advance. For praise is not passive, it is the opening strike, the first blow in a battle that has raged long before you were born. And the enemy knows this, which is why he seeks to suffocate your voice with discouragement, to choke your breath with fear, to convince you that silence is safer than exaltation, because he knows that silence grants him territory, but praise claims it back. And as I journeyed further, I witnessed how praise reshapes the very structure of the unseen. It disarms accusations, it dismantles lies, it destabilizes fortresses that the enemy has built brick by brick through years of anxiety and shame. Praise shakes these walls until they crumble, not because of emotional intensity, but because praise aligns the soul with the throne from which all power flows. And this alignment is warfare, because once a soul stands under the banner of God's dominion, every shadow loses its legal right to remain. And I saw in that realm how praise functions not merely as a sound, but as a strategic movement. The way an army raises its standard before charging into battle. For when a believer lifts praise in a difficult case, they are not ignoring the attack, they are declaring which kingdom they belong to. And that declaration reverberates across the unseen like a trumpet summons in ancient war, drawing heavenly reinforcements into the conflict and placing pressure upon the enemy from directions he cannot defend. And I watched angels move with swiftness when praise rose from suffering, saints, their wings slicing through the darkness like spears of radiance, their presence overwhelming the forces that sought to smother hope. For praise becomes the invitation that allows the host of heaven to descend into the battlefield and shift the tide. And the enemy, knowing this, fights hardest to steal praise from your lips, because he understands what many believers do not, that when praise rises in adversity, his influence collapses. And as I continue to observe the mechanics of this invisible war, I notice something profound. Praise is a weapon crafted for confrontations beyond human capability. When the mind is overwhelmed by torment, praise slices through confusion. When the heart is choked by despair, praise releases breath back into the soul. When circumstances seem immovable, praise summons a strength that defies natural order. For praise connects you to the divine current that flows from the throne of God, a current that dismantles chains and pushes back shadows with unrelenting force. And the enemy dreads this connection, because once a believer taps into it, they become untouchable, not because they feel strong, but because they stand under the covering of the Almighty. And I saw how praise changes the atmosphere around the believer like a sudden shift in the wind before a storm breaks. Praise disrupts demonic strategies. Praise confuses spiritual adversaries. Praise weakens every assault designed to suffocate your faith. And in the grand architecture of God's kingdom, praise is positioned as the heartbeat of warfare, because praise is the sound that echoes the victory of the cross into every present battle. And when you lift praise in the midst of fear, you declare that fear is not your ruler. When you lift praise while surrounded by uncertainty, you declare that God, not circumstance, defines your future. When you lift praise in grief, you declare that death does not hold dominion. And these declarations strike the enemy with a force he cannot withstand for praise, places you under truth, while the enemy survives only by deception. And as I witnessed the currents of this invisible conflict, I realized that praise is more than an act of devotion. It is an act of rebellion against fear. It is the refusal to bow to the tyranny of despair. It is the uprising of a soul that chooses allegiance to the kingdom of light, even when surrounded by the territory of darkness. And when such a soul lifts its voice, heaven responds not with silence, but with movement. The kind of movement that shakes foundations and rearranges outcomes, and breaks chains that once seemed welded shut. So understand, this praise is not optional in warfare. It is the cornerstone of victory. For the battles you face are not fought with earthly weapons, nor won by earthly strength. They are won when praise rises like a banner, declaring that the Almighty reigns over every shadow and every storm. And when you choose to praise in your impossible case, you step onto a battlefield already marked by God's triumph. There came a moment in my reflection when the truths of heaven pressed so closely against the realities of human struggle that I could no longer keep them in separate realms. For revelation becomes transformation only when it takes root in the ordinary hours of living. And so I turned my gaze from the vastness of the invisible war to the places where your feet touch the ground each day. And I asked, how does one carry praise into the raw weight of real life? For it is easy to speak of warfare and glory, yet far more difficult to lift praise when the ache in your chest feels sharper than any sword. And in this turning I saw the many valleys through which you walk, and I felt compelled to guide you through each with the light of praise as your companion. For praise, though it is a weapon forged in heaven, was crafted for use on earth. And I begin with a valley of affliction, when sickness presses against your body or the body of one you love, when test results tremble in your hands or pain lingers without relief. In such moments, praise may feel unnatural, yet it becomes the breath that keeps your spirit from suffocating. Praise in affliction is not denial, it is defiance. It is the heart declaring that disease does not hold the final word. And when you whisper, Lord, you are my strength, even as weakness spreads through your limbs, heaven hears a warrior refusing to let despair claim the throne. And then I saw the valley of loss, where grief settles like cold ash around the soul, where memories sting and emptiness echoes louder than comfort. Yet praise in grief becomes the bridge that keeps you from drowning in sorrow. When you declare God you are near, even though you cannot feel him, your words become a torch guiding you through shadowed corridors. praise in mourning. It does not erase the tears, but it ensures the tears do not swallow your hope. And then I walked with you into the valley of financial strain, where bills rise like waves and the future feels fragile, where worry gnaws at the edges of your sleep, and in such hours praise becomes a shield. When you say, "You are my provider," even before provision arrives, you loosen the grip of anxiety and invite the God of abundance to step into your lack. Praise in need is the declaration that scarcity cannot define your destiny. And then I beheld the valley of broken relationships, where words have cut deep and trust has shattered, where silence grows heavy and distance feels impossible to cross. Yet praise in relational pain anchors your heart in the character of God rather than the chaos of conflict. Or when you whisper, "Lord, teach me to love," even in this your heart becomes aligned with heaven's healing. And praise transforms bitterness into ground that can once again produce peace. And then I saw the valley of delayed answers, where prayers linger unanswered and dreams seem suspended in the air, and hope thins with every passing day. Yet praise in delay is the act of a soul that chooses faith over timelines. When you declare God, you are working even when I cannot see it. You uproot the seeds of doubt and strengthen the roots of trust. Praise in waiting does not speed time, but it sanctifies it. And then I walked into the valley of mental battle, where thoughts churn like storms, where anxiety whispers lies and fear tightens its grip with relentless persistence. Praise in these moments becomes both sword and shield. For when you speak truth into the chaos, your mind shifts from the realm of fear to the realm of faith. When you say, "God, you are my peace," even when unrest claws at your chest, your praise tears a path through the storm and invites the Spirit to steady your breath. And then I beheld the valley of nights, when God feels distant, when prayers seem to fall into silence and the heavens feel closed. Yet praise in spiritual dryness is among the greatest acts of devotion, for it is worship rooted not in feeling, but in covenant. When you say, "You are faithful, even when I cannot sense your presence," your praise becomes an altar upon which God descends with renewed strength. And through each of these valleys, I saw the same truth unfold. Praise does not remove every hardship, but it changes how you walk through it. Praise does not silence every storm, but it ensures the storm does not silence you. Praise transforms valleys into corridors where heaven draws near. And I tell you this, as one who has observed the patterns of human suffering, praise is not the reward of the victorious. It is the survival posture of the faithful. And if you would dare to weave praise into the rhythm of your days, you would find that darkness loses its influence and fear its authority. For praise grounds you in the eternal, even while you walk through the temporary. And so I ask you to carry this truth into your own life. Praise not only when the victory is visible, but when the battle is raging. Praise not only when the promise is fulfilled, but when the promise feels far away. Praise not only when you feel strong, but especially when you feel weak, for praise in such moments becomes the very breath that lifts you from collapse into courage. As I drew near to the final edge of this journey, a realization rose within me with the quiet strength of dawn. For every truth we have uncovered, every mystery we have traced, every battle we have witnessed leads to this single moment, the moment when praise is no longer an idea, but a decision that belongs not to angels, nor prophets, nor ancient saints, but to you here in the immediacy of your own struggle. And I tell you, with the weight of one who has walked through kingdoms of shadow and chambers of glory, that praise in difficult cases is the turning point of the soul, the line drawn in the sand where fear withdraws and faith advances. For praise is not merely what you offer, it is what you become when the presence of God saturates your heart. It is the rising of your spirit above the trembling ground beneath your feet. It is the declaration that even in the unseen battle, God reigns, and no force of darkness will write the ending of your story. And so as we stand together at this threshold, I call you to your challenge, not a gentle invitation, but a summons worthy of a warrior of light. For the next 7 days, I ask you to confront every difficulty, every burden, every whisper of fear with praise. When discouragement speaks, let praise answer. When anxiety tightens its grip, let praise break it. When exhaustion seeks to silence you, let praise rise and reclaim the ground. For in these 7 days your praise will carve pathways through territory the enemy believed he had secured, and you will witness how heaven responds to a heart that refuses to surrender its song. And now, as this chapter draws to its close, I lift a prayer on your behalf, a prayer shaped by fire and breathed with reverence. May the one who commands storms with a whisper turn his gaze toward you. May his strength clothe your weakness. May his light chase every shadow that surrounds you. I pray that your praise becomes a weapon in your hands, a flame in your spirit, a banner over your home. May it shatter the chains that have lingered too long and silence the voices that have tormented your peace. May your praise rise like a steady river through every valley you cross until the ground beneath you trembles with the weight of God's presence. And may you discover in the days ahead that praise is not merely the sound of victory, it is the birthplace of it. For when you lift your voice, heaven moves. When you exalt his name, darkness flees. When you declare his greatness, your impossible case becomes the canvas upon which God writes his deliverance. And now I leave you with this final truth. Praise is the breath of a soul that refuses to be conquered. So breathe it, speak it, live it, for victory awaits the one who dares to praise in the impossible.